I'm Matt Gishard. This is No Holds Barred. Very pleased to have here today as a guest Michael Santos, who spent 26 years incarcerated in the federal prison system. So, Michael, I mentioned that you had been incarcerated in the federal system for 26 years. But I want you to tell us, at first, before my introduction, I thought to myself, do I call you a former inmate, a former convict? How do you want me to refer to what happened to you?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's something I used to hear when I was in prison. So staff members would say, are you an inmate? Are you a convict? And my message is I'm an American. And every day I am working to be a better American. And I'm proud of that. So that's what I am. I'm an American citizen.
Well, so am I. So the difference between the two of us, we're both American citizens, is I'm a former prosecutor and I put an awful lot of people in prison. You're someone who some other prosecutor put you in prison for a significant period of time. 26 years, that's a long time. What I'd like you to do, and not getting into all the details, but tell us just a little bit about the time that you were incarcerated, how long you've been out, and then I want to get into the great work that you're doing, and it's related to the time that you spent and what you're doing now to perhaps make our system a better system when it comes to people who've been sentenced to prison.
Well, first of all, I want to say it's a privilege to be here with No Holds Barred and be able to talk to a former prosecutor. That's always been a thrill of mine to listen and learn. But since you asked about my background, I'm a guy who made some really bad decisions as a kid. I was 20 years old. I saw the movie Scarface and thought that might be a cool way to live, and started to believe that I could make a living or make a better life by trafficking in cocaine. And with all the wisdom of a 20-year-old, I believed that if I didn't touch the cocaine or transport the cocaine, I really wasn't breaking the law. So I'd hire other people to do it. And of course, what that did is it exposed me to a significantly longer sentence and more punishment. I was arrested on August the 11th, 1987. And at that time, the only thing I wanted was to get out of prison. I didn't see myself as a criminal, as crazy as that sounds, because I said, well, I didn't traffic the cocaine. I hired other people to do it. Not understanding how the law worked. And then I hired an attorney who told me what I wanted to hear rather than what I needed to hear. And because of my poor choice in hiring counsel, I made some really bad decisions. And even though I knew I was guilty, I went to trial. During the trial, I perjured myself on the witness stand. A jury convicted me of every count. And it wasn't until that moment that my life changed, because I led back to a jail cell, and a correctional officer actually really changed my life by giving me some books that helped me change the way that I think. And those books helped me stop thinking about what was happening to me and start thinking about how do I want to emerge from here. And I'd start thinking about people like you. And I'd say, is there anything that I could do while I'm in here? Anything that would cause somebody like you to see me not for the bad decisions I made during the recklessness of youth, but rather how I responded and how hard I worked to reconcile with society. And when I started asking those kinds of questions, it led to a 3-part plan. What would you expect? You'd expect me to work to get an education. You would expect me to contribute to society in some kind of meaningful, measurable way. And you'd expect me to build a support network. And I believe that if I could do that, maybe someday I wouldn't be asked if I'm an inmate or a convict, but how did you become so successful after prison? And that was the vision.
And it seemed to have worked, huh?
It certainly did. Yeah. I mean, I went through prison. I got an undergraduate degree, a master's degree. I got married, built businesses, and have come home. And now the very people that confined me are now my clients.
That's wonderful. Tell us a little bit. I want to talk a little bit, know an awful lot about prison experience and your thoughts on what you can do for people in prison. But I want to kind of get back to what we talked about in the first place is you formed a company and it's become a very successful company, and you have a purpose. And could you tell us what that company is and what your purpose is?
So I've been out of prison now for 10 years. And of course, when I got out of prison, it became very important for me to prepare. I mean, I'd been incarcerated for 26 years and I was 49 years old, and I'd never held a job in society. I'd just been in prison my whole life. And so I always considered myself to be unemployable. And I have to figure out, how am I going to build my own business? How am I going to create business opportunities given where I am? And so I built a series of businesses that would allow me to do what I really want to do and what I'm passionate about doing. And that's really changing the system to influence the lives of 1 million people that go through the criminal justice system. And that is what my real passion is advocacy work and showing other people, I may have committed a crime, may have made a bad decision, but how do I reconcile? How do I find my way? How do I put myself on a pathway for a better life? And if I can do that, I might be able to end some of the intergenerational cycles of recidivism and maybe help to make society safer and improve outcomes in the culture of confinement. And so my business is about trying to solve those problems. And it's a very complicated problem because there are many people who want to see the prison system grow and expand. And instead of thinking about the result that we want, which is a safer community, they're just thinking about building a bigger prison system, and a bigger prison system that has a remarkable rate of failure, where the longer we expose somebody to corrections, the less likely that person is to function as a successful law-abiding American. And to me, that's a flawed system. So it's a ministry for me to want to change that.
What I like you to do, actually, I like that because my experience within the system as a prosecutor was in the 80s and 90s. And there are two systems that we talk about, the federal system and the state system. They're two very different. So I worked in both of them for a period of time, knowing kind of different sentencing structures, different things, different ways of approaching it. And then the idea of recidivism. So I guess I'm going to have you talk about all of that. But, you know, fundamentally, and you said it, is citizens want to feel safer. All of a sudden, we're seeing a rash of car break-ins in our cities. We're seeing all kinds of things that people didn't see before. And they're scratching their heads and going, I don't feel safe. What is wrong with our system? And the sense of many people is we need to be stricter about the laws. We need to put more people in prison. We need to make more people accountable. So that is kind of the knee-jerk reaction that we do when crime goes up, or the perception of crime going up. So I know that's an awful lot to throw on you, but this is kind of what this conversation I want us to have is very candidly your thoughts on when we put a lot of people in prison, does it actually lower crime? Does it have any impact on crime? And does it have any impact on people's perceptions of their own personal safety?
Well, I think you're right. I think that people do want to see more prosecutions of people who break the law. And frankly, I would say that's probably a pretty good system. You know, we do. When somebody breaks the law, we should prosecute them. We should put them in prison. But what we should also do is think about, what is the outcome that I want? Is the outcome that I want to extract a pound of flesh? Because, well, for those of us who have read Shakespeare, we know what happens when you try to extract a pound of flesh, right? You don't get the outcome that you want. If you want an outcome that says, I want a safer community, I might put somebody in prison, but I said, what's going to happen then? And it's not up to the system to change them. It's up for the individual to change them. The problem, in my view, systemically, is if we don't have a mechanism for somebody to work toward improving their life in an objective way and work toward an incrementally higher level of liberty through the work and the merit they do and the efforts to reconcile with victims and with the community, then we have a system that's going to get what we have been having, which is extremely high recidivism rates. And I would propose that we could change that if we modeled it more along the lines of what society is like, what America is like. People can reach their highest potential by how hard they work. And it doesn't mean we're not going to punish them. It doesn't mean they're not going to face a consequence for criminal behavior. But when we measure justice by how many calendar pages turn, we're not really creating a mechanism that gets the outcome that I want. Because I can put somebody in prison that if they come back to society and they still don't know how to function, they're still going to steal to a loaf of bread to eat. They're still going to break laws. They are never going to embrace the model of living that I think we want citizens to embrace in this country. And that's what my work is about. It's about helping understand that this ecosystem is complicated. And the answer is not just put somebody in a cage and think, oh, if he's there for 3 years, justice will be served. If he's there for 2 years, somehow justice won't be served. I'd say we'd be, or 10 years, or 20 years, or in my case, I had a 45-year sentence. Why 45? Could justice have been served at 35? Could justice have been served at 25? Or did somehow no 45 years will solve the problem? And I would say I was as ready to become home in society after 8 years as I ever would be.
Well, I was just going to ask you that. So knowing you and what you've been through, though, maybe 5 years would have done it for you, or perhaps less.
If I did it. Mm-hmm. If I just thought, see, that the system is, if it's a knee-jerk thing that says 5 years is enough, well, then I can kind of put in my head, oh, all I've got to do is 5 years. 5 years, I'm done. That's not the answer. If it would have said, yeah, 45 years, I'm fine with that. The problem was there was no mechanism at all in an objective way that says, if you do these things, somebody's going to have a chance to take a look at you again and say, is continued incarceration warranted? I was ready after 8 years because by then I'd earned a bachelor's degree, a master's degree. I was a published author. I had a massive support system in society. I was not 20 anymore. I was in my early 30s. I was ready. And instead, I had to serve another, 17 or 18 more years at a tremendous cost to taxpayers. And anybody that would have I would have loved to have made the case. Doesn't mean I could have gotten out, but if I could make the case and build support, I think it would have been a better outcome for society. But there's no anger here. That's part of my mission.
Well, that's amazing because several thoughts come to mind based on what you said. Now, we talk about a safer society inside, but I think the perception of most people, and certainly as a prosecutor when I would do lifer hearings and go to prisons, the perception of the prisons, that's also a very unsafe place. Is prison, in fact, much less safe than society at large? So I guess we have two questions is, how do we make people who have spent time in prison, once they get out, productive citizens and appreciating that they have a life in front of them? But also, what do we do for people who are in prison to make them do the same thing as you did? Kind of the epiphany at a certain point saying, I want to get out, and when I get out, I want to be able to do something besides talk to a parole officer and come back in through the front door again into prison. And that's very difficult. So it seems like your life's goal and your company is to get to the prisons, not wait outside the door, although do both. Is that right?
Well, it's to undo or to innovate in such a way that says, how do we get the result that we want? The result that I want is a safer community in society. To build that safer community in society, we've got to recognize, we have to recognize who's in prison. Now, typically, the person that is in prison is somebody that has lived on the margins, that has not had great role models. Not an excuse, it's just that's most of the people in prison, percentage-wise, are people that have a lower education rate, lower experience in the job market, lower, positive environments, and they come to prison. And the question is, how do you get somebody like that to recalibrate? How do you get somebody like that to embrace the American work ethic or the pro-social values? And to do that, in my view, you've got to really do a lot of work. You've got to help employers understand this person may have made a bad decision at one point, but he can still bring value. And if he's proven himself to bring value, Don't have a policy that blocks him from employment. I've got to have a program that helps taxpayers see. At some point, justice can be served not by how many calendar pages that have turned, but how hard an individual has worked to make amends and reconcile in an objective way, not by my definition, but by the community's definition. Then help the people in prison understand their role. If you want to see changes, systemic changes, how hard are you working to sell yourself and to develop those credentials and the body of work and the mindset that shows, hey, you should be free. And then the staff who work in prisons. Well, if you change the culture of confinement, do we improve the life cycle of people who work in corrections? And it's a really terrible statistic of people who work in prisons, how many of those people's lives end in suicide or end in divorce or end in unhappiness. And what could you do to improve the culture of confinement? And then there is the legislature. How do we help them understand this all ties in, should focus on building a safer community, not necessarily in just extracting more punishment without thinking about the outcome that it produces. Since prison populations have exploded since the 70s, you've also seen an explosion of gangs and intergenerational cycles of poverty. And systemically, I don't think it's really worked as well for America as many people think. I mean, look at the recidivism rates. If we built planes and said, hey, for every 10 planes, 8 of them are going to fall out of the ground, let's not replicate the model and do it more. You're going to say, let's try and rethink this. And that's what we're not doing with America's criminal justice system. No holds barred.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you. I like that. Interesting, because I think many people would say, well, that's naive. Look, we have these dangerous people. We have killers. We have very dangerous people. And as a prosecutor, I did appreciate that that was a number of people that we sent to prison, but actually a small number. So many people went to prison for other things, like selling cocaine. That was really big in the 80s. And we would have somebody caught down in Richmond for selling a rock of cocaine, and they'd be on felony probation. And then they'd get caught again, and they'd be on felony probation, and maybe they get caught a third time, and the judge would say, I have no alternative but to send you to prison. We're not talking about being a dealer. We're talking, a big, bindles. We're talking little amounts.
Right.
But to state prison, because now that person is not the same person that has murdered 3 people in cold blood. But the sentences were, in many cases, every bit as much. And so we have that issue of there are some bad people that no matter what you do and no matter what your program does, aren't going to get out and shouldn't get out. And then there are a whole bunch of other people that kind of model themselves in prison on that strong guy over there who's never getting out and has nothing to lose. And when you talk about gangs and things like that, that's what we see, or at least the perception of
Yeah,
of
I think you could
society.
use a continuum. And just I'm not going to use statistical evidence, but just say on a continuum, you've got 100 people, and there's going to be 10% on the left side of that continuum. They don't need a program. They're not really criminogenic. Some situational thing happened and they went to prison, and they're never going to go to prison again. You got 10% on the other side, they're inherently evil. And it doesn't matter what program you put, they are never going to want to do it. They prey on society. And there's 80% in the middle. And those 80% can go either way. But we've got a system that has 80% of those people going the wrong way. And if you want to statistically improve it, you've got to look at the entire system. And the entire system is not so simple to say, I can measure justice by how many calendar pages turn. That's my view.
Well, it's actually a view that many people have had over the years, because we've seen changes in the law as to sentencing. We've seen, I know San Quentin has changed from being one of the highest end dangerous places like Folsom way back in the day to being a reception center after a while to being something brand new now. It's a completely different concept. The idea is, we look at the Board of Prison Terms, we look at the legislature. Everybody is looking at this and saying, we're not doing it right. We're not any safer.
Do you know who is doing it right?
Who?
the Scandinavian system. Are you somewhat familiar with the Scandinavian system?
Well, as a matter of fact, I am. So I have to say, I worked for a law firm in Denmark, lived there for a period of time. And when I was there, the entire time I was there was one murder. It was in Copenhagen, and it was somebody used a gun and killed somebody. And it was absolutely unheard of that there was a murder. And they talk about the short periods of time that people are in, I'll say incarcerated, in some kind of structured system that committed crimes, but nothing like ours. Now, people there would say, well, this is a little teeny country, and look at, this is, there are reasons for that. And I often used to think that, no, they were, I will say, much kinder in their sentencing. They looked at things from a different perspective.
Because they started with the end result. What they want is a safer society. And so they said, let's solve for a safer society versus our system that says, no, let's extract a pound of flesh. Well, you get the pound of flesh, but you don't get the safer society. In Norway, the system is, hey, I understand that most of these people are coming back. I want a safer society. And the measure is, who should assess when a person should come back? And their program is the people in the community. So they form ombudsman panels. And they might say to you, hey, you've got a 20-year sentence. I'm cool with that. You committed a crime. The punishment is 20 years. It is up to you to prove worthy of an earlier release. And we want to help you. So here are our suggestions on what you can do to earn freedom. And it's up to you how badly you want it. And at the end of the day, it's this body of citizens that have the discretion, which is very different from our concept of a determinate and indeterminate sentence structure here. Because it is genuinely the citizens that have the power to welcome you, and they want you to come back as a good citizen. So they will tell you, do these things and increase your level of liberty in incremental stages. And that happens all the way through prison. It is never about, our goal is to extract a pound of flesh, which doesn't get you the result that you want. When I went to federal prison in 1987, the population level in federal prison was about 30,000 people. Then it blew up to more than 200,000 people, but society did not become safer. Because we're not solving to make safer societies. We are solving to satisfy this lust for punishment, not recognizing what's the outcome of that.
You say we've made these changes, and I keep looking at the changes that we've tried to make. At one point, early in my career as a prosecutor, they talked about California. They talked about rehabilitation. They didn't just talk about we're putting people in prison. And then there was kind of a move afoot, I think, that rehabilitation is not working. We're just gonna call it punishment.
But why, when you said that there was a movement on rehabilitation, have you really studied what it meant and what they did? Or are we just using a buzzword?
Yeah, well, I'm using a buzzword because I haven't studied it. What I look at it often, the Board of Prison Terms or Parole. I mean, there is a group of citizens. Now, they're appointed by a governor.
And who were the people on that board?
Well, they're people that are appointed by a governor, so they could be...
But who were they on the board? They were law enforcement. There were former sheriffs. There were people that had a very vested interest in growing the ecosystem of confinement. And it's a $100 billion ecosystem. So there are many people very vested in keeping this big ecosystem. Fundamentally different from Norway, which says, I want people coming back as good citizens. So it's employers, it's neighbors, it's people. I want a good neighbor. A sheriff who's built his life locking offenders up is going to have that bias. Lock them up, throw away the key, extend punishment. And that's going to get votes. And that's awesome if that's what you want. But if you want a safer community, do something different. No holds barred.
Well, that's so funny. You talk about sheriffs. So interesting, during the pandemic, lots of sheriffs were saying, we're not going to book somebody. We're okay. A police agency would bring them to the facility. We're not booking them. No. And there was a period of time that people were going, well, what are we doing? We have all kinds of people who are, who've been arrested, but they're not being booked. The sheriffs would not accept them. And I appreciate you being here. I want to shake your hand again.
Thank you. No holds
like what
barred.
you're doing. And we want you back on No Holds Barred.
All right.
So thank you very much, audience, for listening to this fascinating show, and thanking Michael Santos for being here. If you like this, and I'm sure you will, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and absolutely please put your questions below, because we will have Michael back here and we will look at those questions that you've asked, and I'll ask them of him, and probably plenty more questions that have come up since that time. But I'm so pleased to hear of these success stories and this plan to make us safer and make our society better. Thank you very much.